Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. And welcome to this webinar on life on a farm, long-term sustainability through integrated pest management, organized by IEEP with the International Affairs Branch of Agriculture and Agri-food Canada. It's part of a series of green policy events, looking at Canadian and European experience alongside one another. It's going to take the form of a conversation with three experts from different points of view on the theme of integrated pest management on either side of the Atlantic and Canada and different parts of the EU, one after the other. It's essentially going to be a chance to dig into their expertise. So we probably won't have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end unless we do very, very well on the program. But there will be a Q&A function which people will be able to use if they want to ask a question in writing to individual speakers, and they get a chance to respond to. And there will be a chat function if people would like to exchange thoughts, contacts, information, references to reports, and so forth. The event will be recorded, so I hope everyone is content with that. And we will be under a little bit of time pressure, so it will be important, unfortunately, to keep to our 10-minute slots. I'm David Baldock. I'm a senior fellow at the Institute for European Environmental Policy, and I'm going to be guiding us through the conversation today. And very pleased that we've been able to get so many people with real expertise and a lot of experience in this subject, and welcome to them all. I'm going to start off by asking Kathleen Donohue, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister at Agriculture and Agri-food Canada, just to introduce the event, and then we'll have our first speaker. So over to Kathleen.
Hello, everyone. Bonjour. Thank you, David, for the introduction. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm very pleased to be here. And as David mentioned, we have, I think, a very impressive and diverse list of participants today, from farmers, from academics, as well as officials from the European Commission's DG SANTE and the Canadian Department of Agriculture and Agri-food Canada. I know that farmers in both Canada and the EU are working towards a better and more sustainable future, and integrated pest management certainly plays a key role in ensuring that the agriculture sector contributes to this end. Canada is committed to a sustainable agriculture sector that has environment and climate change considerations as top of mind. And I think this webinar series is an excellent initiative, one that hopefully, aims to share knowledge, best practices in both Canada and the EU from diverse perspectives. So I think I want to begin by just thanking the speakers today for your time in terms of contributing to this important conversation and opportunity to share those perspectives. I also want to thank the audience today for tuning in to what is our second session in a series. And hopefully today's session will be productive and will offer some meaningful discussion and also reflection for all of us. Canadian agriculture and the government of Canada has been keenly interested, I have to say, in terms of the EU's farm to fork strategy, which I think has been certainly a very important contribution, and one that I believe outlines many goals that Canada shares. Smart action on climate change today is frankly an investment in a strong future for farming, for our farm families, and for our economies. And so, I applaud the EU for taking certainly significant leadership in this end. When I look at our last seminar, our first webinar, which was held back in November, and hopefully many of you participated in that, And I just want to maybe do a little bit of a signal check, because there have been a number of significant developments in Canada in terms of our commitment to creating and moving and advancing forward on more greener policies. And so since our first kickoff session in November, notably, the Government of Canada has announced the development of a new Canadian agri-environmental strategy, which aims to support the sector's action on climate change and other environmental priorities towards 2030, as well as 2050. The Government of Canada has also introduced, since we last gathered, funding for the Department of Agriculture and Agri-food Canada under what's called the new Agricultural Climate Solutions Program. So this fund is part of a broader initiative that's focused on nature-based climate solutions that also encompass restoration and conservation of ecosystems, as well as the planting of 2 billion trees over the next 10 years. We've also launched a strengthened climate plan in Canada to help meet our goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40 to 45% below 2005 levels by 2030. It will establish the building blocks towards a greener, more competitive, resilient economy, and also help to get Canada to net zero emissions by 2050. Under our strengthened climate plan, we are looking to work with the agriculture sector to reduce fertilizer-related emissions by 30% by 2030. So I think this is very similar to the farm to fork strategy, where we are working to reduce nitrous oxide emissions associated with fertilizer application. It obviously, I think, also aligns us very closely with the EU in this area, and I think this is certainly an area where I think there's going to be considerable interest in working together on solutions. Another element of our strengthened climate plan is the launch of an agricultural clean technology program. Now, this program helps the agriculture to develop emissions reducing technology. So in sum, the Government of Canada has now allocated over $500 million towards these various climate change initiatives. And together with these programs supporting new clean technology, on-farm beneficial management practices, I think we're quite confident in terms of being able to reach our targets and to help farmers feed the world sustainably. I'd note that, apart from today's session, upcoming next month on the 17th of June, we'll be hosting our third webinar series on the topic of nature-based solutions in agriculture. So I would welcome you to join us for this session to be able to further our understanding and our learnings between the EU and Canada as we look to join forces in tackling climate change and coming up with solutions to support our farmers. As for today's discussion, I wanted to highlight quickly that Canada shares, I think, very similar views to the EU when considering IPM as a key approach to sustainable agriculture. We've committed significant resources to support research and innovation, integrated pest management to help growers in their efforts to produce crops in more environmentally sustainable ways and in seeking methods to minimize risk while maintaining economic profitability. My department's Pest Management Center, targets projects which aim to develop and promote the adoption of various IPM technologies and practices. For instance, this work has currently enabled the registration for use in Canada of now over 29 new biopesticide products, contributing to additional tools in the pest management toolbox for growers. AAFC also continues to develop tools and technologies to help improve the quality of crop yields as well. So today we're joined by Dr. Cezarina Kora, who's going to walk us through a bit more in detail the Government of Canada's role and efforts in this area. So in closing, I just wanted to maybe underscore that, we look forward as Canada to collaborating with the EU and with key stakeholders such as those gathered here today as the farm to fork strategy and initiatives start to take shape and progress. We remain committed here in Canada to making our agriculture sectors, I think, sustainable, and I think that's a shared goal between the EU and Canada. I think we can all agree that these changes are necessary and that they need to have lasting positive impacts on our environments and on our future generations of farmers to come. Canada will ensure that farmers, stakeholders are well supported and prepared to combat climate change. And I think, again, this is another shared goal. So I hope today's discussion is fruitful and also helps to perhaps illustrate that Canadian agriculture is proactive in incorporating integrated pest management solutions in their daily practices. We are proud of our farmers, and I think you're going to hear from Nevin today and learn that farmers take these responsibilities very seriously. So once again, thanks very much. Really looking forward to hearing from today's speakers and some of the reflections that they have to offer us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kathleen, for starting us off and giving us a bird's eye view of policy and directions in Canada and underlining some of the similarities in the themes and the aspirations. Really interesting to hear that. The way we're going to run the event is we're going to start with two policymakers. First of all, in the EU, then in Canada. Then we're going to hear from two farmers. And finally, we're going to move more towards the future scientific research, the pipeline of new products with two experts in that area. So to get us started, we are fortunate to have two people who are at the heart of policy making on IPM. And the first of those is Andrew Owen-Griffiths, and he's the head of unit of plants and organics in DG SANTE, which is the part of the commission dealing with health and food safety, and also in a driving seat around the famous farm to fork strategy. And he's been working in this area since around 2000, I believe, and he's been responsible for the Sustainable Use Directive since 2016. So welcome, Andrew. If you'd like to put your camera on.
Yep, it's on.
It's on. Great.
I just have to speak to bring it to the front. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you've got the drum kit there. That's impressive. Can I just start off by asking you, what role do you see the farm to fork strategy positioning? How does IPM help as a tool to make farming practices more sustainable in Europe?
Okay. Well, I mean, if I could start just by first of all thanking you for the invite and for arranging such an interesting range of knowledgeable speakers. I don't think there's many meetings I've been to with Bulgarian and Canadian farmers in the same virtual room, so it'll be an interesting conversation. We're particularly interested in international experience. We've had a number of meetings, or the Commission has had a number of meetings with Canada where we share common objectives. We've had meetings with the Pest Management Centre, and we'll have further meetings, including with Quebec next week. So we're interested to hear the international perspective. We think we have common problems to deal with, common issues to deal with, and hopefully common answers to those problems. So to come to your question about the farm to fork strategy and IPM, I think the first thing to say is it's clear that the objectives of the farm to fork strategy are very much in line with those of IPM, which are to promote sustainability in farming and to have a holistic view to the way we produce food. So yeah, it's central to achieving particularly the pesticide targets of the farm to fork strategy, but also has an impact on various other issues, greenhouse gas, soil health, biodiversity, fertilizer use, and so on and so forth. So it's a very multifaceted approach. It's central, therefore, to the legislation in this area in Europe, which is the Sustainable Use Directive. And of course, it's a broad area. People often say to me, what should we be looking at? Should we be looking at new agricultural practices or new breeding techniques or crop rotation or biological controls, or should we be looking at IPM? And I always think, well, IPM is all of those things. It's about bringing them all together. So that the answer is yes, all of those things, including IPM. But I mean, we're not complacent. We realize that there have been deficiencies or weaknesses in implementation of aspects of the Sustainable Use Directive and of IPM in Europe. So we're now in a process of looking at new legislation and strengthening the policy framework in this area so that IPM can play an even greater role in achieving the farm to fork strategy.
No, thank you very much. As we've developed thinking on IPM in Europe, it became an obligation for member states under the Sustainable Use Directive. Can you give us a view on how you feel uptake is going in different parts of Europe? How far we got? I realize this is a big topic, but let's give us some highlights.
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult question, and it's one that I could talk about for a long time. But interestingly, we have asked that question of the 27 member states. So we asked the question of them, what is the level of uptake of IPM in your member states? And a number of member states said, we don't know. A number of member states gave us a figure, and an even greater number of member states said, well, 100% because it's a legal requirement. So the questions therefore arise, well, how do you measure IPM? We have the international recognized principles and they're in our legislation, but the difficulty is converting these general principles into specific practices that are useful and necessary for a specific crop. So there is a need for a lot more work at a local level, a regional level, and sometimes even a local level, to convert these general principles into practices that are understandable and available at farm level or at user level. That you have to convert this general policy legislation into a practical step that's understandable at farm level. So yeah, there's a lot of work needs doing there, I think, to improve the measurement of uptake. I think I have to say that we have seen an improvement. We've discussed this for a number of years, and we've identified good practices in many areas, but those areas are not necessarily a member state. There might be a specific crop or a specific group of farmers that have developed good practice. And I think what we need to look at is making that good practice more widespread across Europe, well, and globally ultimately. We have seen, I mean, when we talked about IPM even 4 or 5 years ago, nearly all the examples that we came up with as good practice were in orchards or in vegetable production or in greenhouses, in closed environments. But more and more, we're seeing more widespread engaging with the difficulty, the large arable crops, the large production that I'm sure Canada's very aware of, and converting IPM principles from a smaller framework to a more macro scale. So yeah, the uptake is increasing. We know that more can be done and needs to be done to make it more global.
No, thank you. And taking your point that there are variations between regions and different crops and conditions and so forth, could you give us a little bit of a perspective on where you think the kind of main barriers lie to faster uptake and the different views on this? Where would you say at a kind of bigger picture European level those barriers lie, and where does the Commission hope to reduce some of those with initiatives you've got underway at the moment?
Okay, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that there's fairly widespread acceptance with the 8 principles that are in our legislation in Europe, and that echo very much the principles of IPM at an international level. So there's no real desire to reinvent the wheel or to look at IPM as being something that needs changing. I think the general principles of this hierarchy of interventions, of identifying the pest, of monitoring it, of having a threshold for intervention, of having lower risk interventions first, and then monitoring to see that the whole process is working. This triangle that you've seen and everyone I think has seen is sound, and we don't see it as needing reinventing. I think that the three things that need looking at, and this is fairly multifaceted. I give you broad strokes, and obviously people can talk about the detail afterwards, is this issue of crop specific guidance. So I mean, if you take the principles, the first principle has a range of different practices that should be used to prevent pests as the first step, including, for example, crop rotation or selecting certain cultivars that are resistant. Now, I mean, if you're an inspector, for example, and you're going to a farm, you can't just ask the question, do you have crop rotation? Because the crop rotation has to be a certain frequency with certain other crops to be beneficial in breaking the pest cycles that we're interested in. So we need specific guidance for that specific crop in that specific region that will help to convert those principles to a standard that can be assessed and used at a local level. Some of these exist, they do exist at European level. There are private standards as well as part of private certification schemes that also cover a lot of this, but we need to make this more standardized and more spread throughout Europe. We're looking at the possibility of making it part of our legislation that this guidance is in place. I think we described IPM as decision-making process, and I think the more tools you have, the easier it is to make a beneficial decision, if that makes sense. If there's no alternatives, then you can't use alternatives. So we need to see what we can do to increase the availability of alternatives, including biologicals, micro and macro, and we shouldn't rule anything out. New genomic techniques, new technologies in monitoring, in modeling, or even in interventions. So there's a whole range of steps that need to be taken to increase these tools and to help the farmer to be able to make decisions that are sound. And that brings us to the final point, which is economics and incentives. I mean, farmers are only going to do this if they see the advantage, and very often the advantage is not in the short term; it's in the medium or long term. And there, in Europe, we're looking as far as possible at the use of the Common Agricultural Policy and the national strategic plans that member states have to develop to see how we can use financial incentives to support this process with medium and longer term economics in mind, rather than short term issues. And then there's a whole range of support issues about inspection, about training, about certification, which we're looking at in the context of the legislation. But I keep it to those three main issues if I don't run the risk of speaking for longer than my allotted time. Thank you, David.
Thanks a lot. No, you kept very well on time. Appreciate that. And I think those 3 points could be a helpful reference point as we go through the webinar on guidance, decision making, and economics and incentives. So thanks a lot. We'll now switch to Canada, if we may, and I can introduce our next star of IPM, who's Dr. Cezarina Kora. And she has a degree in plant pathology and, like Andrew, has been working in pest risk management for many years. And she's currently head of the Pest Management Centre in the Agriculture Department in Canada, which has the lead on this topic. So she has a federal overview, not just at the province level. So welcome, Cezarina. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much for the introduction, David. And I'm very happy to be here and to share our experiences and very glad to hear from Andrew. And it's very obvious that we have quite common issues and challenges, and hopefully we will be looking forward to shared solutions. So yeah,
So
thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming and being available. And my first question is just for you to give us a sketch on the role of the federal authorities and the provinces in Canada. We've had a bit of a hint on the European scene, and I know you're familiar with Europe, with the member states and so forth. Just give us a bit of a sense of the dynamic right now and of who's doing what and how it's going.
Yeah, sure. So simply put, agriculture in Canada is a shared responsibility between the federal, provincial, and territorial jurisdictions. And each of these jurisdictions have their own defined roles and responsibilities when it comes to the support, delivery, and implementation of IPM. If I would describe the role of the federal department, it's mainly into establishing and delivering policies and programs and various initiatives, as Kathleen mentioned, that support the viable and competitive sectors by setting overall growth and sustainability goals. I would mention, for instance, in the federal program, there is a large support on research and innovation to enable scientific and technological advances, leading to development and delivery of innovative IPM solutions, including tools, products, and practices, all of which is needed for sustainable crop protection. I would highlight here, for instance, programs like multi-year breeding programs leading to the development of new crop varieties with resistance to specific pests, or quite a large biological control programs leading to the release and introduction of numerous biocontrol agents. And some of this work has been done in collaboration, with close collaboration with our European scientists. It's important to stress that Federal Department of Agriculture works very closely with provinces and territories and industry partners in the development and delivery of these policies and programs. Some of these are quite collaborative and cost-shared, and I can highlight here, for instance, the Horticulture Agri-Science Cluster Initiative, which has a number of projects delivering on sustainable pest management solutions. I can mention here, for instance, the sterile insect release technology for cabbage maggot, or use of cover crops for wireworm control, and this is just a few among many others. But in the end, it is the responsibility of the provinces and territories to assist the sector in IPM implementation and in general to advance uptake of new technologies as these are becoming available through the programs, to different research programs. Provinces set their own sustainability goals, they develop their own strategic plans and approaches. They deliver their own IPM programs to support their growing communities while addressing their sector's priorities. For instance, provinces also have their own research and development programs to support pest management tools and practices. They support pest surveillance programs. They provide extension services and expert guidance through their large number of crop and pest management specialists. They offer pesticide training courses and issue applicator licenses. While these approaches vary among jurisdictions, there is fair to say that all have in common that they have abundant, up-to-date IPM-related information, such as tools and diagnostic apps and services, all available online, which is easily accessible and quite useful. I did describe so far the role of the public sector, but I wanted to also emphasize that the private sector and the industry groups also have some role in promoting and advancing IPM adoption through implementing various production standards required to meet for certain markets. They offer scouting services. They're also the production, product manufacturing companies promote the use of beneficial practices to mitigate the risk of pesticide resistance, for instance. But to conclude, I would say that IPM adoption is voluntary in Canada, and we recognize that there are various levels of IPM along the adoption continuum, from basic to advanced multi-tactic approaches, which farmers would opt to use based on availability and suitability with their farm operations. And I agree with Andrew 100% when it says that we need to have these IPM approaches quite regional and to meet the local needs of the growers.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent overview. And as you say, the drivers in Europe are more legislative, target driven, whereas in Canada it's more helping to support the farmers and others in the sector with tools, and a key tool is research. Could you give us an idea why research in IPM is a priority in Canada, and perhaps just one simple example of the type of research which is helping with sustainability as well as good crop management?
Sure. I wanted to start a little bit with some figures, just to provide the audience with an idea of the size and the scope of agriculture and the agri-food sector in Canada. This sector is recognized as a key pillar driving the Canadian economy. Just in 2019, it generated over $140 billion and over $67 billion in exports. Agricultural land dedicated to crop production, primary production that is, extends to about 38 million hectares. So this leads to considerably large landscape interface areas where agriculture and natural ecosystems intersect and interact, and they do significantly impact each other. And this is recognized as an important side of agriculture and the need to be addressed. So while aiming to strike a balance between economics and the need to produce safe and abundant food for the growing population, and also protecting the environment, the sustainable development goals remain a key priority for the government, and in supporting long-term growth of a resilient and competitive sector. So that is tying all of it together. So why does the government support research in developing IPM tools and practices? It is actually considered a public good investment. A government recognizes and understands that in order to achieve sustainable crop protection and crop production, farmers need a variety of effective IPM tools available in their toolbox. And Andrew touched on that, so that's great similarity and common aspect. We recognize that IPM allows responsible use of pesticide that is both economic and respectful of environment. By reducing pesticide load in environment, we believe that IPM helps to minimize non-target effects of chemicals, which directly benefit biodiversity and also preserving the ecosystem services provided by beneficial species such as pollinators and natural enemies of pests. And lastly, I wanted to mention that IPM also is considered a great tool, a great approach to minimize the risk of pesticide resistance development, a big issue we are encountering here in Canada, because there is a lot of resistance happening in pest population, especially in weeds. And this indirectly in turn will help to maintain acceptable long-term efficacy for the existing crop protection tools that are already in the toolbox. So I think you had also a second part to the question about the pest management in specific. So just a little bit about the pest management center that I'm part of while addressing the second part of your question. The Pest Management Center is a federal entity and was established in 2003. That was in response of the government to address grower concerns over access to pest management solutions and technology gaps between what was available with between major trading partners at the time. The center is responsible at this time to make accessible to growers additional pest management solutions. There are two programs under this center: the minor use pesticides, which delivers product-based solutions, including chemicals, biopesticides, and organic compounds, all addressing growers' selected priority pest issues. Some of the activities happening under this program are trials conducted to generate scientific data, such as pesticide residue, efficacy, crop tolerance, etc., all required to obtain registration or regulatory approval of these products for use in Canada by the Health Canada's Pest Management Regulatory Agency. And a little bit about the pesticide risk reduction program, the other side under this pest management center. The mandate for this program is to deliver non-chemical alternatives to help farmers transition away from full reliance on controlled products and also achieve risk reduction in agriculture. So what we do under this program, we support research and development projects which generate various tools like forecasting systems, models, identification guides, field guides for growers to help in the field, diagnostic or decision-making tools, various cultural, mechanical and biocontrol practices, IPM systems, and also provide regulatory support for full registration of biopesticides. I'm very glad that Kathleen pointed out the sheer number of biopesticides which have been already registered as resulting from the support provided through this program, 29 at this point, which amounts to hundreds of specific uses. As an example of research, I would highlight a number of arthropod biocontrol projects which enable pest management approaches to partly rely on either introduced or naturally occurring beneficial organisms. So thanks to this research, leek growers, for instance, in Canada now have a beneficial parasitoid wasp to help them suppress leek moth population along with other IPM practices. More cereal growers have access to a parasitoid wasp, which is capable of suppressing cereal leaf beetle populations and helping growers minimize their need for pesticides. And finally, the last example is the cereal growers now have access to a tool which is a smartphone app, and helping them to make informed spray decisions for cereal aphid control. And this is based on key natural enemies present in the crop, identified as key predators of the cereal aphid. So if in sufficient numbers, these natural enemies can suppress aphid population growth below their thresholds, and no spray would be needed for certain stages. So I think that concludes my examples of research projects to help support the industry.
Thank you very much. And that gives us quite a concrete set of very nice examples. And now we need to move on, if we may, to the farm level experience against that background. And our next speaker will be Galina Peycheva-Miteva, who is a farmer from central Bulgaria. And she, having started doing econometrics, in fact, as a degree, took over the family farm in 2007 and diversified production with very much an eye on sustainability. And we welcome her today to talk a little bit about how she sees IPM. So Galina, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. If I may just start by asking you how Bulgarian farmers are experiencing the sort of both the sort of policy pressure and the public pressure for greater sustainability, but particularly for reduced pesticide risks in agriculture.
It's a very, very complex question. Pesticides play a sensitive role in food systems. While pesticide use has grown steadily in the recent decades, a significant portion of the chemicals applied has proven to be excessive, uneconomic, or unnecessary. Farmers and society both strive to gradually reduce pesticide use to a level where negative impacts like health hazards, biodiversity loss, or water pollution do not outweigh the value added in terms of yields or cost savings in production. My experience as a regenerative farmer in Bulgaria on my own farm shows that pesticide use can be reduced considerably without unduly reducing yields or increasing costs of production. I have seen on my own farm that a stepwise reduction of pesticide use is feasible already with the current production systems and with the knowledge, technologies, and alternatives available today. It is a process, and I have to underline that very boldly. That takes trial and error. It's not one size fits all solution, and it takes considerable time and mistakes sometimes on part of each farmer to find what works on their own farm, because climates and soils and landscapes vary vastly even throughout Europe, let alone throughout the world.
Thank you. And that picks up the theme of the importance of being crop specific and climate specific and region specific. Could you think of two other broad lessons you've learned from applying IPM approach, broadly speaking, on your farm?
Well, first of all, one thing I have learned is society needs to comprehend that we farmers, we do not apply pesticides without reason, but in order to ensure productivity, manage entrepreneurial risks, and compete in the market in terms of quality and price. Pesticide use is often cheaper than using alternatives like biocontrol or mechanical pest and weed management. On the other hand, traders and consumers expect cheap and visually perfect products. So the amount of pesticides needed to protect crops depends on the robustness of the farming system. My own experience, and probably the most important lesson, is that in order to succeed with pesticide reduction, it is essential to bring diversity back into agriculture. Farming systems can be redesigned and successfully adjusted based on the available knowledge on agroecology. And I think the fact that there are so many regenerative farms and they are so successful shows that it can be done in practice.
Thank you. And you certainly put the diversity point into practice on your farm. I was impressed by that. And could you give me an idea of some of the barriers you think exist still for farmers in Bulgaria or more widely in Europe, if you think that's more useful, to uptake of IPM? And is there anything that could happen at a European level to help reduce those barriers, like through Farm to Fork or the future, the Sustainable Use Directive?
I think Andrew was a very eloquent speaker, and basically I was sitting and saying, yeah, he got it right. But I would say the cost and the risk over the adoption of a new way of doing business and tweaking it to the specifics of your own farm is a major barrier to entry. My 1,200 hectare farm is the poster example of a successful nature positive business. We are profitable, we are sustainable, and we do way more than it is required. However, and it is a big however, it did not happen overnight, and it took almost 10 years to gradually find out what works, what doesn't work, and what should be put in practice. The trial and error approach is very costly and time-consuming. So I would say that as governments seek to enforce the Green Deal in a sustainable way, and the European Commission is charting its very ambitious strategies, decision makers should consider establishing IPM farming as a legitimate path towards a sustainable agricultural future, because otherwise, without the support of society, without the support of taxpayers and stakeholders, we cannot do this on our own. It's too risky. so it can't be scaled to the point where it becomes a widespread practice. It will be a practice mostly by enthusiasts and farmers who are willing to risk, which is not the point here. We want to do it on a scale where it has magnitude to society.
So that would be support would take the form of perhaps guidance and financial support. Is that
absolutely, absolutely? Because a lot of times, like I said, we have 8 or 9 crops, but sometimes it doesn't work. It's the wrong decision. It's good on paper, it's bad in practice, and you spend an entire year waiting out to do it again without knowing what the end result would be. And if this is your livelihood, it can become very difficult to continue being disappointed. And crops, they take a year to show you how they would fare. It's not something that you can try, test, and say, oh, it doesn't work, let's switch it up in a week.
So there's a process of learning and
absolutely, and tweaking, and I think support groups and professional groups between farmers who can talk to their neighbors and exchange experience, and field days and programs and on-farm research rooted in farmer questions and building a peer-to-peer network, exchanging knowledge and experience is the way to build resilient farms. It's not just talking or writing papers, because farmers, I know farmers, I'm a farmer, I want to see, I want to touch, I want to make sure it's what it says it is.
Thanks very much. Well, that's a great message to
Thank you, it was a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us. And I hope you're going to wait and see how your counterpart in Saskatchewan.
Oh, absolutely.
And he's Nevin Rosaasen. So I'm going to move to him now, if I may, to slightly flatter land than Bulgaria. But he's, like you, involved in policy debates and public discussion, as well as farming himself. And he's a prominent arable crop farmer from East Central Saskatchewan with an original degree in agronomy. And I noticed he's also published with the UN on carbon accounting. So a multifaceted person here. So welcome, Nevin. Are you there?
Hello, David. Yes. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you really well. And can I start off asking you how Canadian farmers viewing the demand from the public to reduce pesticide use in agriculture?
Absolutely. So to start, bonjour et bon après-midi et merci pour l'opportunité de parler avec vous aujourd'hui. And para mis amigos hispanohablantes, buenas tardes y muchísimas gracias para su atención. So how are Canadian farmers viewing the demand from the public to reduce pesticide risk in agriculture? Well, first off, farmers understand that healthy ecosystems are their bread and butter, and that's what support their livelihoods. Farmers are always among the top trusted professionals when it comes to surveys in regards to the professionals in society. Every year we see farmers right at the top with nurses. However, farmers have not done a great job in connecting with our urban cousins to actually tell our story and tell the story of conventional agriculture. So to start, pesticides are expensive and farmers are actually inherently cheap. And I say that not as a cut or a putting farmers down, but farmers can only control their costs. When it comes to the weather, when it comes to prices, the cost of production is the bottom line. That is the only place where farmers have true control of the variables. And pesticides, when used properly, not only increase food security, they can also increase food safety and food quality. So what are farmers doing about it? The biggest thing is continuing adult education. I'm going to list a number of tools and number of initiatives that are out there where farmers can learn about integrated pest management. The first one is the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network. This is a network of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada scientists and researchers, agronomists and farmers that are doing surveys, They're updating prediction maps with new data based on a huge surveillance network all across the Canadian prairies. And it allows farmers and agronomists to report trap numbers, look at wind directions, etc., and where pests are, to get a better understanding of which pests they should be looking for when they're out scouting their fields. Another example of an excellent initiative is Alberta Bug Chat. It's a simple 1-hour conversation on social media, on Twitter, where entomologists, agronomists, and farmers meet online to discuss what types of insects they're finding in their field, what they should be scouting for, etc. And Alberta Bug Chat happens every Wednesday at 10 a.m. and farmers know it. They tune in, they send in pictures of insects for identification, etc. Another initiative that has helped farmers, increase their understanding is Field Heroes. Field Heroes is an initiative that involves many young entomologists within agriculture and agri-food Canada that allows farmers to understand what are the Avengers in their field, so to speak. The field heroes, they're the predator, parasitoid, and pollinator insects that can help farmers maintain healthy ecosystems by understanding what are the crop pests, but also which predator insects, which parasitoids are actually hunting them and keeping those pest populations in check. And again, biodiversity is key to a functioning ecosystem. And this Field Heroes initiative has been an excellent additional tool to integrated pest management. Other tools, of course, precision agriculture. We use it extensively all across the Canadian prairies on broadacre farms. Certainly GPS and auto steer has not only reduced overlap and other nutrient use, but in regards to the use of smart hitches and inter-row cultivation to eliminate weeds. Other technologies like Weed It, which only spray green weeds and don't spray across soil that does not have weed growth, have managed to reduce herbicide use on farms by up to 90%. So these are just a few of the technologies that are employed. Another helpful, conference that occurs every year is the Western Forum on Pest Management, where pathologists and entomologists, as well as agronomists, get together. They discuss what they're seeing in the fields all across the prairies, and they also talk about upcoming research to make sure that everyone's plugged into the newest finding. I need to mention the Manage Resistance Now, which is a great program from CropLife Canada that brings to the forefront the importance of rotating modes of action to avoid, as we've heard before, resistance in pests. One other thing I'll mention, in Alberta, we have developed a farmsustainability.com website, which allows farmers to take a self-assessment tool to see how sustainable they are. It is plumb full of all sorts of fact sheets and resources that farmers can use to not only better understand IPM, but everything from human resources to the environment to water management and other areas. So David, I guess that would be my comments on your first question.
Thanks a lot. And you've covered a lot of fascinating initiatives there. I'm going to remember Alberta Bug Chat. I was just wondering whether you could give us an idea of lessons you've learned, maybe at the farm level yourself. You've talked a lot about guidance and support networks and information, which is great. And you mentioned the profitability being a key point, naturally. In terms of your own experience with IPM, would you share any thoughts you have about lessons?
Sure, absolutely. If I could bring it down to 2 key points, I would say the first point is rotation, rotation, rotation. And that is so important. The farm that I am now, actively managing with my brother originates from 1904. And the name of our farm was Alfalfa Farm because we were 4 years in alfalfa and 4 years out. 2 years of oats for the horses and 2 years of cash crops before going back into a perennial forage. So rotation, rotation, rotation. And most broadacre crop producers have a minimum of 3 to 5 crops that are always in the rotation, and some have as many as 9 or 10. Rotation when it comes to the types of crops. It's really important to try to integrate some fall seeded winter crops such as fall rye or winter wheat. And we've tried to do that on our farm, and with some success. And of course, we have very cold climates, and if we don't have enough snow cover, we can sometimes lose a crop over winter. And the other rotation point is rotate your herbicide and fungicide mode of actions. And again, this is to make sure that we can delay resistance or, fungal pathogen insensitivity to certain modes of action. And the big question always comes down is to spray or not to spray. That is the question. And again, biodiversity is key. What we've seen in the last 15, 20 years is that we've been building more tools to help with decision-making for farmers. Again, a couple examples are an Ask a Kite scorecard to make it very easily to assess whether or not a farmer needs to use a fungicide application. Economic thresholds are always helpful for farmers to understand whether or not it's going to pay to spray. And we've been moving from economic thresholds to dynamic thresholds when it comes to insect species. If we're seeing field heroes in the field, we can feel confident as farmers that we don't have to use that tool, because we know that those insect populations are going to be kept in check. And certainly another thing on our farm, the move from conservation tillage to a complete no-till system has done a huge amount of, work in regards to having nature do the work for us in IPM. Just having all of that straw there for overwintering parasitoids and predator insects has done a huge, it's moved the needle so much in IPM on our farm.
That's really fascinating, and that sort of lines up with some of the low carbon agenda that we might be talking about on another occasion. I think my final question would be, if the provincial government or the federal government is going to do one thing to help speed up the uptake of IPM for farmers like you, what would you like to see happen? And there's obviously a lot going on already, but is there something that would really help?
Sure. No, absolutely. I did want to come back to the concept of IPM being voluntary. IPM is not voluntary. It is essential for complete farm sustainability. And when it comes to different programs, it's really important that the governments recognize that using carrots instead of sticks is the way for farmers to, come forward and adopt these new practices. So, even in discussions recently at the federal level in having absolute reductions in fertilizers, these are not the ways to go. Having efficiency gains is a much better way to implement policies. And again, with farmers, all you need to do is show them the money, okay, and they will adopt. So, in the case of our farm, we've only had 3 or 4 insecticide applications in the last 25 years. And why? Because it's expensive, and we know that, again, these healthy ecosystems are so important. And so with farm families and succession planning, obviously the intergenerational knowledge transfer is so important. And, that comes with IPM. 40, 50 years ago, we didn't even have these pesticides to control pests, and we used cultural control practices. So I think, the best thing we can do is do research into the economics, right, of either taking action or not taking action, having real demonstrations like, my counterpart in the EU, Galina, had mentioned that, farmers want to see, they want to touch, they want to look over the fence and see what their innovative neighbors are doing. And in our case, it is essential. IPM is what will allow our farm to, again, go through succession planning, transfer the soil in better condition than when we first started farming it 25 years ago. And actually 117 years ago, my brother and I have been farming for the last 25 together with my parents. But again, some of that intergenerational knowledge transfer is so important as well.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much for giving us a big picture and also some granularity on your own farm. And stay with us. We're now going to talk to somebody in the with background in the industry, producing the tools of new products, the new pipeline of techniques which should be available to farmers in the coming years to make IPM a feasible reality on a larger scale. So I'm now going to introduce Jennifer Lewis, who is the Executive Director with the International Biocontrol and Manufacturers Association with 230 members, I think. And she's had a long-term career in pest management, disease control, starting off as a field ecologist and working all over the world. And she travels and sees what's happening in I think both sides of the Atlantic. So welcome, Jennifer. Are you there?
Hi, David. Yes, I'm here.
Nice to see you. So let me just start off saying, is the interest in biocontrols and the scale of the market increasing? What's your sense of the dynamics at the moment?
Okay, thank you, David. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody, and thank you to IEEP for the invitation to this Canada EU event. Yes, just looking at the interest and uptake of biocontrol technologies or biocontrol generally. I mean, we're talking about the four sort of categories, so the invertebrates, the biocontrol agents that are invertebrates, the microbials, the natural substances, and the pheromones. And perhaps the most recent member survey that we've done is showing an increase in biocontrol. In 2019, our data for the European market showed biocontrol market to be about 1 billion, and our data from this year shows it to be about 1.2. So we are seeing quite a substantial increase, and globally, the market is around about 4 billion, with the biggest markets being in the US or Canada and the EU. So yes, uptake is increasing significantly. And yes, I think interest is high. Biocontrol delivers the productivity equivalent to chemistry once its use has been optimized on the farm. And in fact, Galina picked up a point I wanted to make, that it's actually field by field and farm by farm and region by region that you make any change, and it takes time to learn. But the huge advantage of biocontrol and beyond the productivity is that you are able to manage your biodiversity more easily, your soil health, and obviously their human health advantages. And in fact, the new work there is on sort of DNA sequencing used by some companies is able to show the broader benefits of biocontrol in terms of nutrient or carbon cycling in the soil microbiome.
And is this upward progress being reflected across the broad range of crop types? I mean, there was often quite a concentration in the highest value crops traditionally. Are you seeing that rolled out more to field crops, and what's the dynamic there?
Yeah, I think we have, you're right, it's very much started IPM in the horticulture and in the protected cropping area and the specialty crops. And that's where we've seen it start. As someone said to me, initially only used biocontrol where you didn't have anything else to use. And what we're now seeing is people saying, actually, no, we really want to use this. Let's have a look at how we can start. And we do have now, particularly in France, we're seeing quite a big increase in arable farmers actually starting to look at biocontrol. And there are many good examples in broadacre crops now coming through. They're not as prolific as they are in specialty and protected, but that's because it's newer, if you like, to work on this now in broadacre cropping. I can't actually hear you, David. I think you may be on mute.
Sorry, I went on mute. Just saying, looking ahead, what kind of support would it be useful to have for the industry to increase the flow of new products, to get them out there, and maybe help farmers to understand how to use them? Because it's not only a question of availability, it's guidance and support, as pretty much all the speakers have said. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of support from an R&D perspective in the grants and things for biocontrol. What perhaps the focus historically has been very much on products and putting maybe new products or new actives into the market and trying them out. What we now really need to be doing is research funding should be about the development and the implementation, ensuring more, putting them into programs, making sure that this actually works on the farm, building it through farmer-to-farmer networks. I think one, it's either Neville or Galina who talked about farming over the hedge. That is how everybody farms. Look at what the guy next door is doing, because it's really such a regional farm-to-farm type of approach. So that's important, but perhaps from the European perspective in biocontrol, the key enabler that we really need is a specific regulation. And given some of the challenges we have in regulation and the time it takes, then we probably need to be doing something a little bit more focused in a slightly different way, perhaps there. So one of the things that would be hugely supportive is to consider that when we look at biocontrol, we're looking for really a definition of biocontrol, because if we could have a definition of biocontrol, then we can start to bring biocontrol into, for example, CAP eco schemes. I mean, the importance of actually providing incentives and reward for any business doing something new is very important. And here I think the CAP can really help in providing almost like an insurance for a farmer during the process of learning how to use something new. I think also that a definition can actually help us strongly in terms of measurement. If we can have a definition of biocontrol, we can actually use that as an indicator for IPM. We can also start to set targets around how much biocontrol do we want. We look at it as being 75% of any crop protection used should be biocontrol. We also obviously are supportive, very supportive of training, the importance of actually doing the work actually on the farm. The specific regulation for biocontrol, as I mentioned, is something that to date we don't have in the EU. But it is important and worth noting that any new biocontrol product that were to be ready today, then it has to wait till 2023 probably. That's what our indications are today to actually enter evaluation into a member state. And the process then takes sort of 5 to 8 years to complete. So if you wanted a new biocontrol product today on the market by 2030, under the current timelines and process, it would be difficult. So either adapting a regulation or defining biocontrols so that we can fast track those products through the authorization system, or allowing derogation of those products would actually be extremely helpful.
Well, yes, thank you. Yes, you point out obviously an important issue in Europe, which is the whole authorization side, and I'm not sure we've heard about that in Canada. That's interesting. Before letting you go, can I just ask you, you mentioned France, and clearly that's been one of the EU member states which has had one of the more ambitious pesticide reduction programs. Has that led to more take up of biocontrols? You mentioned there was more interest in France. Is that anything to do with the policy framework in France, or is it to do with other things?
Certainly in France, there's been huge support for biocontrol, and I think they're now at about 11% of the French market in the most recent survey is biocontrol. There's certainly several things that have been done in France, which I think have been found extremely helpful. They're eco-phyto farms, where they've been allowing to demonstrate how to produce in a more sustainable way with more biocontrol. Also working more extensively on programs. So they put together a multi-stakeholder approach and use their contrat de solution, where they have their whole program for a particular crop and pest. And that's what's interesting about that, is that it involves all the elements. So you might have researchers working alongside industry, working alongside advisors, working alongside distributors. And And also they've obviously looked at the decoupling of advice and supply. How effective that will be, as it remains to be seen.
Brilliant, thank you. That's an excellent overview and some challenges there. Thanks very much. And now we're going to turn to our last Canadian expert, who's Professor Dilantha Fernando. He's a professor in the Department of Plant Science in the University of Manitoba and Dean of Studies in St. Paul's College. And he also has had quite a long and distinguished career working on IPM. He's helped large numbers of Canadian farmers in a practical level in developing new tools, and won the CPS Award for Outstanding Research in 2020. So we look forward to talking to you, Dilantha, about research. Are you there?
Yes, thank you, David. Yeah, good morning and good evening. Yeah.
Good evening. I'm going to pitch him the first question. So you've devoted a lot of your research career to IPM. Why is it such an important topic to you? What's inspirational about it?
Thank you, David. Yeah, I think it goes back to my childhood days where I grew up in a city, and I was always a firm believer that I should be in some way making a headway into agriculture. And fortunately, I was able to. And my main goal right from the beginning was how to keep the environment and the food in a safe manner. And to do that, I have been a firm believer of IPM. And one of the ways that I can also ask a question back is, why not? Because IPM, Integrated Pest Management, even though it is used in a certain way today, it has been there for a long time. And Nevin actually nailed it by saying that earlier it was all cultural practices that we had, and not particularly anything to do with chemicals. So chemicals came much after. And so people have been successful. The only difference is the agriculture today is required for a larger population in the whole part of the world. And I think that's part of the reason that we have to be really thinking about the IPM strategies to be implemented even in a better fashion and also more. One of the other things that I've been always fascinated was to do with what I cannot see. And what I cannot see are the microbes. There are millions, or if not billions, of microbes that are so beneficial. And some of these chemicals can have a huge impact on these microbes, which are beneficial microorganisms for the plant, for the soil, for all the other food networks. So protecting the non-target species through reduced impact of pest management activities, that again leads to IPM, is a hugely important part. So I'm a firm believer on that as well. It reduces the potential for air and groundwater contamination. I have a family. I have to think of my kids and their future generation. So that's another thing that I've been always interested in, and also decreasing the amount of opportunity for the worker and the farmer to be exposed to these pesticides. That's another important thing that I always think when I look at the overall goals of my research. So I'm also a firm believer that what I do in the lab has to, at the end of the day, reach the farmer. That's the bottom line in my research. So from research to the farmer. So to do that, there has to be some applied ways that we get to that. And IPM seems to be the best strategy. Just one of that in that toolbox is rotation. And again, Nevin mentioned that very eloquently, saying rotation, rotation, rotation. And actually, rotation does a lot of things in mitigating diseases and pests. However, with certain types of pathogens, you really need other strategies of IPM to be in place so that you can make a better and more sustainable approach to controlling these pathogens and insects. So that's part of the reason that I'm a firm believer of IPM. And for the last 22 years, my research has been on biological control, looking at new methods of disease management tools, taking into consideration that Canada is a country that produces so much of crops, so much of grain, so much of quality food, but mostly for the export market. So that's about 70 to 80% of our crops really go out of the country. So to do that, we have to be cognizant about what is required by people in Europe, what is required by people in China, what is required by people in India, and so on. So it's not just Canada itself. So that environmental risk management that we do has a huge impact on the world and the food safety of people who consume our foods around the world.
No, thank you. And based on your own research, how do you think IPM in a Canadian context, specifically with sort of Canadian crops, as you say, a major exporting country, how do you think the next developments in IPM will help to make agriculture more sustainable in Canada?
Okay, thank you, David. Yeah, it's an interesting question because there are certain perceptions even outside of Canada that we have to be really thinking of what we do. But going back to what really Canada looks at, as Kathleen put, I think that policy of pest management, Cezarina brought a very good, a lot of examples of how we are already doing things. So I'm just going to focus on only one thing that has really worked, and it's a new pest management tool in the toolbox that the farmers in Western Canada has. So this started with the resistance on a particular pathogen, the resistance in canola breaking down somewhere around 2010 and 2011. So I immediately wanted to make sure that I had a strategy in place through research that was not making the farmers now go back to applying fungicides. So to do that, I had to be strategically coming up with an idea. And the idea was just like if you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you that you should not be taking streptomycin over and over again because you are going to develop resistance. So I had the same idea from a plant side to look at if we develop resistant varieties, and that is done by seed companies, resistant varieties that can be changed over time, that we can then allow the pathogen not to break down that type of resistance. So to do that, what we did was we first worked with the seed companies. So you have to gain the whole industry together. That is so important. You cannot work in a lab and not think about the whole industry. So you have to have the farmers, you have to have the industry all in the same place to do this. So that's what we did. We got all the resistant varieties identified and put them into groups so that, and then we told the farmers, now we have an opportunity to change different resistance groups in your farm rather than grow the same variety, same resistance group. So by doing that, the farmers were able to overcome the disease of blackleg, which is a hugely important pathogen in mitigating in Canada. And that now has become a tool in the other IPM toolbox that we have in Canada, and especially in Manitoba, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, where the bulk of the canola is grown. So it's an excellent way to showcase that through the funding of the federal government, 70% of my funding comes from the Canadian Agriculture and Agri-food Canada, and 30% from the growers. So they have come together to fund the research. So each year I get about $1 million for my research, and that has been very sustainable. And you can see that if it goes to 20 years past, that shows that Canada has been really committed to that sustainability because they have been funding the IPM type of research that I've been doing.
Finally, just very briefly, do you see a big future for IPM in the big arable crops, the wheats and the canolas in the prairies in Canada? Yeah. Do you see really step changes there?
Yeah, I think, again, I need to emphasize that IPM has been there and will be there. IPM has been there for a long time. And again, farmers like Nevin has that experience to see it on the ground. The rotations that they do, scouting that they do, the field resistance levels that they use with the varieties, and now this new tool of rotation of resistance groups. These are the best management practices that I can think of for all different types of crops. So, and with today's technology, it is becoming easier. That's all that is happening. Precision agriculture, understanding the microbiome, as Jennifer put it, understanding through nuclear sequencers, understanding exactly what a particular system is doing to another microbe. All that has now been possible because of the advances in science, advances in agriculture, and we are becoming more and more having an opportunity to do IPM in a better fashion. So I think IPM has been there, but more of that to be used in a more sensible and more precise manner is coming along. And I think that's the future that I see. And one plug again to biocontrol, because biological control is happening. It is nothing new. It is happening naturally. But with the advances in science, we can identify those systems and put them into practice. So that's what is happening.
Thank you so much. That was a great insight from research. I'm just going to very quickly, because we're running out of time and I need to have a minute or two to wrap up. I'm going to quickly just go back to Andrew and then Cezarina for half a minute or a minute each, just to say whether they have any insights as to where there might be scope for cooperation, lessons learned from the EU versus Canada. We in both cases, we've got divided responsibility between the centre and the member states or the provinces. Do you have any reflections, Andrew, from what you've heard and the way things are done in Canada, the way things are going in Canada, that just might be relevant in Europe or might lead to some cooperation?
Yeah, I think the thing that really interested me was the issue of trying to get the information out to the farmer. So, I mean, basically, we've talked at a policy level about developing crop-specific guidance and about alternatives. But I mean, one of the real issues is how that information gets down to farmer level. And we've heard that farmers can be risk averse, they can be somewhat conservative. They need to see things and feel things to take them on board. So there's a big question there about how you get the information once you've got the policy down to farmer level. And I was really excited and interested to hear about Alberta Bug Chat and some of the examples. And I think that's one thing that we haven't engaged in discussion with Canada on, that I think we can perhaps take forward a little bit. I mean, obviously that's not the Commission's role. It's the member states' role to disseminate further down to farmer level, but it's a conversation we need to have with member states, and also we need to support that with policy. We need to make sure that member states have an obligation to provide independent advice and to provide a framework that supports demonstration farms and peer exchanges and so on and so forth, not just within a member state but between member states. So yeah, that's one thing that came the conversations, is that that's possibly something we need to explore a little bit more in our conversations with Canada. So thanks for the question.
Thanks, Andrew. And very quickly, Cezarina. Well, you've only got a minute, I'm afraid. So
Yeah.
Reflections right the other way from the Canadian side.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That's a very good point. The government also engages into technology and knowledge transfer activities. I can elaborate a bit more eventually when we talk together, but what I wanted to emphasize is that hearing from the growers was excellent and very encouraging, and indicating the need for on-farm demonstration was I kind of caught my attention because we, in the past 17 years that we have been operating as part of this program, we have heard directly from Canadian growers that to break through the adoption barrier, they really need to have access to on-farm demonstrations. And this is to validate performance on scientifically proven and effective IPM packages, which are both economically and environmentally feasible and beneficial. So just wanted to share a piece of news that we at Pest Management Center, in fact, we are intensifying efforts on developing tailored IPM systems besides the development of the individual tools and practices. And this is to address priority pest issues which are selected specifically by growers. So we are set up to start next year with a pilot project where an IPM system for cabbage maggot in brassica vegetables will be co-developed with our provincial and grower partners, and we're combining all a variety of available tools and practices in the toolbox. But on-farm demonstrations will be conducted and will be a key part of this work to validate the recommended system and to indicate their economic and environmental benefits. So I just wanted to share that piece. And yes, we can. I know that EU is also similarly starting like a IPM pilot initiative. So we'll be glad to share your experiences and compare notes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very, very much. You both underlined, I think, what some of the scope for cooperation is. Clearly, the two different models in Canada and the EU are heading in the same direction in some ways. Whether the drivers at the policy level are different, they still point in the same direction in terms of the market, in terms of the actual requirements at farm level. Farmers do need to have appropriate forms of crop management which are absolutely tailored to their conditions, and they need support for that. And this came across. So our most progressive producers, and we've heard from two today, can be pathfinders, but they probably don't represent every single farmer around. So we are going to have more effort to bridge the gap between the idea and the delivery mechanism on the ground. The comparisons between the two countries and the two, well, they're more than countries in a way, has been really, really instructive. So I'd like to thank everybody for participating, all the speakers, all the people who've joined us today. Thank you for being there. I'm